world leaders are gathering in Wales for a meeting of Nato. With me to discuss events is Dr. Jonathan Eyal of the Royal United Services Institute. Jonathan, what is significant about this summit as opposed to all the others that NATO's had over the years?
Well, I think this is a summit where really NATO has to stand up and be counted. There are a variety of reasons. First, the operations in Afghanistan are winding up. NATO has to project an image of success. It cannot appear to be concluding on a sign of failure. But the most important challenge is, of course, to the security of Europe. Nobody believed 25 years ago, when the Cold War ended, that we will have to discuss questions such as emplacements of military hardware or of troops in Eastern Europe. But that's precisely what faces the alliance. We have the gravest sustained threat to the security of the continent and to the security arrangements on the continent since the end of the Cold War, coming from Russia in the Ukraine crisis.
So it's really a sort of back to the future summit for NATO. In that, what are going to be the measures that leaders will announce?
Well, clearly there would have to be a beefed up rapid reaction force that will have to be deployed across Eastern Europe in times of necessity. There is a consensus that we will not witness the beginning of permanent bases in Eastern Europe. Secondly, there would be some discussion about how we can maintain some dialogue with Russia. But the key element and the key mission of the summit is to display a united front. One of the biggest problems that we've had in dealing with the Ukraine crisis was the deep divisions inside the European Union and NATO about what could be done with Russia and at what pace. At the very least, the alliance has to achieve is a show of unity on an agenda that makes sense.
How credible do you think this new mobile, flexible force will be? Obviously, we've already got the NATO response force of 14,000 troops. This new brigade size deployment is going to be about 4,000 troops, and I think NATO is saying ready within 48 hours. How credible is that?
Well, the instruments put in place are actually quite credible because nobody believes at the moment of a frontal assault by Russian troops, of an invasion in a sort of Second World War style of European soil. The problem is that a lot of what the challenges facing NATO are those of undermining countries from inside, what military planners now call the hybrid warfare, Russian troops that are inserted with no markings and are undermining a country from inside, and that is not something for which NATO has been prepared before. So I think one needs to look at these forces as very much a deterrence, very much an attempt to persuade Moscow that there is a huge difference between Ukraine, which is not a member of NATO and where we have ruled out any military options, and members of NATO who are subjected to the unconditional security, mutual security guarantee of the alliance.
I suppose if all of those are the sort of hot issues of the summit, the elephant in the room is going to be defence spending.
Quite. And the British hosts of the summit are still anguishing, and have continued to anguish for days, whether they should even raise the issue at the meeting as almost like a sort of party pooper. Because the reality is that there is no consensus about what constitutes defence expenditure, and countries that are still facing perhaps a double dip recession in Europe are unlikely to suddenly find the cash to spend on their defense. Germany, the single biggest European country, has ruled out in advance of the summit any question of increasing the defense expenditure. However, one needs to look a bit more careful than this sort of binary kind of debate. The reality is that if we have not found a ceiling for defense expenditure, we've at least found a floor. Namely, I find it very difficult to see now any government cutting further into defense expenditure. So in a way, that's already an achievement. Secondly, we might be able to get a consensus on shifting expenditure away from standing armies of conscripts, which are quite frankly useless, and much more towards expenditure on hardware and in a communal spirit, namely a number of countries buying in it together. So it's simply not true to say that there is no movement on the defense question. Sadly, it would be a very snail-paced movement.
Dr. Eyal, thank you.